8. Projecthabakkuk. During World War II, British War Office scientist Geoffrey Pike proposed turning icebergs into aircraft carriers as a way to save money. It would be used as an alternative to using conventional building materials, which were in short supply at the time. After receiving the go-ahead from Prime Minister Winston Churchill in 1943, military engineers began designing what they hoped would be a fortified iceberg that was both economically efficient and convenient to repair. Assuming everything went according to plan, each aircraft carrier would be 2,000 feet long and 200 feet wide. That's more than twice the size of the Titanic and would have room for 300 aircraft. A 60-foot-long, 18 meters prototype was built in Canada's Lake Patricia using a mixture of ice, wood, tar, and refrigeration pipes. It was functional but impractical, raising obvious questions about whether it was realistic to use ice as a building material and if it would be worth the cost of keeping the ice cool. In the meantime, the need for aircraft carriers decreased thanks to the introduction of planes that could fly for longer periods, the availability of Iceland as a permanent base, and the development of radar that tracked U-boats more accurately. Just months after it began, Projecthabakkuk was abandoned in favor of other projects that better suited the military's needs. 7. Secret Service anti-espionage operations. In 1915, nearly 2 full years before the United States officially entered World War I, President Woodrow Wilson tasked the Secret Service with intercepting and disrupting a German sabotage network that was plotting against the US, England, and France. An 11-member counter-espionage unit was formed in New York City, where they performed surveillance on a meeting between a German sympathizer and his friend, Dr. Heinrich Albert. After ending the meeting and going separate ways, Albert boarded a train, unaware that Secret Service operative Frank Burke was watching his every move. In a hurry to disembark at his stop, Albert left the briefcase on the train. It only took him a split second to realize it, but by then, Burke had snatched the briefcase and was leaving the scene. Albert tried to chase after him, but never caught up. 2 days later, he posted an ad in the paper offering a $20 reward for the return of the briefcase. By then, the Secret Service had thoroughly examined its contents, which included a treasure trove of detailed plots to interfere with the Allied cause. The documents revealed that Albert was Germany's top financial agent in the US, and that he had received around $27 million to fund espionage activities on American soil. These efforts included disruptions to manufacturing and shipping, influencing public opinion through the purchase of powerful publishing companies, imposing an embargo on munitions shipments, and other strategies for undermining the US and its allies. Perhaps most disturbingly, the briefcase contained a plan to have 85,000 German soldiers land on the New Jersey coast with the goal of isolating New York City from the rest of the country within 24 hours. Thankfully, that never happened, and the espionage ring was broken up. 6. Pre-war espionage. During the early 1900s, Germany sought to increase its naval power while Britain scrambled to stay at least one step ahead. Tensions between the two nations worsened as the rivalry intensified in the years leading up to World War I. Paranoia ran high, and relations devolved to a crisis point. In January 1912, a German spy named Armgard Karl Graves traveled to Scotland under the guise of attending medical lectures. His true intentions were to gather information at naval bases, including any developments in weaponry and other equipment, and to observe the movement of Royal Navy vessels. The German spy network in the UK wasn't nearly as big or skilled as British leaders believed, but their heightened diligence paid off. They became aware that Graves was a secret agent within days of his arrival to Scotland and put him under surveillance while intercepting his mail. Graves realized he was being watched after investigators searched his room during a trip to London, and he was arrested a week later. His possessions revealed that he was communicating information through secret codes that were written down in a medical diary. Those who got to know Graves during his time in Scotland testified in court about his suspicious behavior, which included constant worries about his mail being interfered with and a seemingly excessive interest in naval affairs. He served 18 months in a Scottish prison, but was released early after promising to be a double agent. Graves was sent to the US after promising to procure a German spy master's list of agents, but he kept asking for money and failing to provide valuable intel, and was let go from the position. He published a book boasting about his successes as a spy, even though only he seemed to think he was ever good at the job. After getting convicted of fraud in the US and spending 3 years in prison, he was deported back to Germany. 5. Operation Tracer. For decades following World War II, rumors swirled about a secret chamber inside the Rock of Gibraltar, hidden somewhere among a 30-mile network of tunnels that the British military built during the conflict. Even after it became well known that these dark, narrow pathways housed a hospital, soldiers' barracks, and storage space for guns and ammunition, the secret chamber's existence remained unproven until relatively recently. Known as the Stay Behind Cave, the 45 by 16 by 8 foot base was built after the British discovered Hitler's plan to invade Gibraltar. It was constructed as part of a top-secret project called Operation Tracer, which called for a team of 6 men to observe the harbor from inside the cave. They would be sealed in with enough supplies to last them a year, including 10,000 gallons of water, along with radio equipment and power generators. Conditions would be extremely basic, with 2 small toilets, a sink, and essentially the bare minimum when it came to both necessities and comfort. The floor would be lined with cork to prevent any noise that might give their position away. The only way the team would ever exit the stay-behind cave was if the Allies defeated Germany before their provisions ran out. Otherwise, the secret room would become their tomb. They began their training, but the mission was called off as Hitler's priorities shifted away from Gibraltar. The chamber's equipment was removed and the area leading up to it was sealed off. Civilians spent years searching for the stay-behind cave while the government remained tight-lipped about its existence. It was finally discovered in 1996, offering a first-hand glimpse at the environment 6 soldiers were planning to live and possibly die in. If your government asked you to be a part of a top-secret mission, would you? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. The Ahnenerbe. Founded in 1935 by leading Nazi party member Heinrich Himmler, the Ahnenerbe was a think tank and SS faction devoted to finding evidence to back up their claims that Germans descended from a superior ancient Aryan race. The group consisted mainly of scientists and scholars from various disciplines who were, of course, on board with the Nazi agenda. In addition to crediting Aryans for most of humanity's major accomplishments throughout history, the Ahnenerbe argued that its racial doctrine was supported by scientific research. The vast majority of experts throughout the world disagreed, and still do. But Ahnenerbe scholars found ways to interpret the evidence to fit their narrative, and Hitler's government used their findings to justify many of its unspeakably cruel policies. Members of the organization even ventured out to different parts of Europe in search of artifacts connected to this alleged ancient race. In late 2015, a hermit living in Russia's Adygea Mountains allegedly found a brown Ahnenerbe suitcase. He told the press that the case bore the group's insignia, along with 2 skulls belonging to unidentifiable creatures. It appears as though these objects were never studied by credible scholars, leaving their authenticity highly questionable. But news of the alleged discoveries left some wondering if, at the very least, Ahnenerbe members had come to the area in the quest to find their alleged Aryan roots. 3. Operation Bodyguard. One of the objectives of the 1944 D-Day landings at Normandy was to catch the Germans completely off guard. To prevent the Nazis from increasing their military presence in the region, the Allies initiated a campaign to deceive the enemy into thinking that they planned to attack elsewhere, known as Operation Bodyguard. This wouldn't be easy, since France was the most logical choice for an Allied invasion of Western Europe. Military officials were also highly skeptical that the plan would succeed due to the failure of a previous deception strategy. They nevertheless approved the operation, which aimed to mislead the Germans into thinking that the Allied invasion would come later than it was actually planned for, and that there would be attacks elsewhere, including in other parts of France as well as the Balkans, Norway, and Bulgaria. The details of these fictional plans were spread through leaked information from double agents, intercepted communications, false rumors, and threats of attacks in places the Allies had no real plans of invading. To enforce the false narrative and make the plan seem real, the Allies stationed fictional military units and staged phony operations in the places detailed in the bogus plans. Operation Bodyguard was extremely complex, with multiple smaller operations being carried out in various places as part of the bigger plan. It was a strategic success, staving off a large German presence at Normandy, while giving the Allies a chance to build a beachhead. And while there's no predicting how Normandy would have turned out in the absence of the operation, the ability to distract the Nazis enabled the Allies to take a much more prepared approach than they otherwise would have. 2. The Unknown Warrior. More than 1.1 million British soldiers died, went missing, and/or were taken prisoner during World War I. In 1920, Army chaplain David Railton MC came up with the idea of an anonymous grave to represent all the lives lost, but especially those who remained unaccounted for, and whose families had to cope with not knowing their fate or being able to give them a proper burial. Painstaking steps were taken to ensure that the identity of the unknown warrior would never be discovered. Exhumation parties disinterred 4 graves containing the bodies of unidentified British soldiers who died in different places and took the remains to a chapel where they were laid out and covered with flags. Brigadier General Lewis John Wyatt selected the remains that would represent the unknown warrior, and they were placed in a casket and transported to London. The arrival of the body was a major event for the nation in mourning, with spectators lining the streets as horse-drawn carriage transported the remains to Westminster Abbey, where the casket was ceremoniously lowered into the ground. Dignitaries, state officials, the royal family, and senior military officers participated in the procession. While the point of the unknown warrior's grave is to never know the identity of the man who was laid to rest with such honor, of course, people have tried to find out who he is. The full details of the mission to unearth and choose the unknown warrior were never revealed. And while some think this means the government is hiding information in a deceptive fashion, the very concept of the memorial calls for some level of secrecy. Over the years, there's been speculation that those in power know the man's identity, but those involved in the process of choosing the remains adamantly insisted throughout their lives that this is untrue, and that nobody knows who the unknown warrior is or where his body came from. 1. Dieppe Raid. On August 19, 1942, a 6,000-strong force of Canadian and British troops attempted to launch an amphibious attack on the French port of Dieppe on the English Channel coast. They were spotted by a German patrol boat, and by the time they reached the shore, the Nazis were preparing and waiting. Within 10 hours, nearly 1,000 Allied soldiers were killed, close to 2,000 were taken prisoner, and more than 2,400 were wounded. The battle's failures have long been known, but it wasn't until 2021 that American historian Leah Garrett shined light on a previously unknown plan to try stealing a Nazi Enigma machine during the operation. In her book, X-Troop, The Secret Jewish Commandos of World War II, she details how the British military planned to send a small group of German refugees disguised as soldiers into a hotel used by Nazi commanders, where they would steal the much-coveted machine and any codebooks to go along with it. The idea was that the Germans would be so preoccupied with the battle that the undercover refugees could slip in and out unnoticed. But the botched attack was so disastrous that the plan was never carried out. Garrett learned about the clandestine mission after discovering an after-action report written by one of the refugees tasked with carrying out the operation. At the time, German attacks on merchant ships were threatening to devastate the Allied war effort, and being able to decode the Nazis' communications would be a major advantage. Codebreaker Milton Keynes had partially decrypted an Enigma machine the previous year, but the Germans had switched to a more complex machine with a much more difficult code. Unfortunately for the Allies, they probably couldn't have chosen a worse way for trying to get their hands on one. Thanks for watching. Which one of these mysterious projects were you most interested in? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.